Welcome back. This is a webinar because you have all been clamoring for some information about the world that we find ourselves in. I am Matthew Leffler, a real-life lawyer, the armchair attorney, law professor at Michigan State University College of Law. I say go green. You all, I presume, scream back, go white. And I appreciate that. I do. I feel it in my bones. It's been about 3 months. It's been about 3 months since one of the most consequential Supreme Court decisions impacting the supply chain has happened. This, of course, was the Montgomery case that went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. Transportation, giving a good showing before the court. Unfortunately, for so many brokers out there, it didn't go the way so many had anticipated. In fact, it was a unanimous decision. And in that unanimous decision, what was reached was that brokers can, in fact, be held liable for negligently selecting a motor carrier. The whole idea before this case was that brokers enjoyed some federal preemption that allowed them to simply say, I just do price, route, and service. I'm not in the business of maintaining commercial vehicles. I'm not in the business of truck drivers and having their ability to make sure they're getting the drug tested randomly. That's not what I do. My job is to help people move freight from one place to another place. Well, one of the things that happened in that incredible Supreme Court decision, and you can listen to the entire oral arguments in the podcast. I'm not sure which episode, it's around there somewhere. One of the really interesting things about this case was a concurring opinion. And in the Supreme Court jurisprudence world, that means that there was a decision by another justice that isn't the binding decision of the court, but it helps the justice say, hey, I agree with the outcome, but I have a couple of thoughts I'd like to add. Justice Kavanaugh had that concurring opinion. One of the things he talked about in that concurrence was that his expectation was that brokers were not going to face a big, massive tidal wave of litigation, that most brokers probably have a reasonable vetting process, and it might be the cases on the edge where we see brokers being held liable. I use the example, it's like opening the floodgates and telling the river, hey, slow down, don't go so fast, take your time. The water doesn't do that, and neither do lawyers. We just go out there and we start litigating. And that is the real question that every broker has been asking since Montgomery and well before Montgomery. What do I have to do? What's the standard that I'm held to? What is reasonable care? How do I do my job? If I'm relying on the federal government, what else can I do? And that question is being answered in a whole bunch of different ways. And one of the organizations that have been front and center in all of this is a great company called Genlogs. Right there, you know them. We've been working with Genlogs now for a little bit. Love that team. Love what Ryan Joyce and the team has built in terms of finding ways to provide real truck intelligence, to know where is the asset, what's it doing, and how many, maybe what should be looking for that freight, because people seem to want what's inside that box. Well, what we have today is a webinar around something brand new, something that I am excited to introduce you to, both Gian Favors, who is the general counsel, corporate counsel for Genlogs, and of course, our good friend Ryan Joyce, who's been on the podcast several times, and in fact has come to my law school class remotely, of course, and helped my students understand what it's like to raise money and build products and try to help solve one of the biggest challenges in supply chain, which is, of course, safely delivering freight on time and undamaged. Without any further ado, let me bring in my good friends, Ryan Joyce, and of course, Gian Favors. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Heck yeah, it's great to be back. We always love coming on this show and having a chat with you, Matthew.
I'm pumped, man. So, Brian, I gotta take a moment, okay? I love you. I love what you've done. Gian, you're a lawyer. That's my bread and butter. Who are you, Gian, and what do you do for Genlogs?
It's good to be here with you. I've heard some great things, Matt. So thrilled to be here to have this conversation. I am Gian Favors, and I've been at Genlogs for a little bit. Ryan and I go way back. We're working to make sure that we can better keep the safety on American roads throughout.
Now, when you were talking with Gian, when you're talking with Ryan about this opportunity to work with Genlogs, did he ever tell you that, like, once you get into supply chain, there's no way to get out of it? Like, did he ever tell you that, or is that news to you at this point?
Well, I'm thrilled to be in the business, thrilled to meet you, and thrilled to be getting to know more and more folks working in this industry.
I
I've
love
come
it.
from a few different places and have had a wandering, non-traditional career across a bunch of different areas as a litigator. So I'm looking forward to talking about how we're thinking about litigation risk across the industry.
Well, that's what I want to get right into. So, what we have been talking about, Ryan, you've been working on this for some time, this idea of what is reasonable and ordinary care. And before we jump into that, let me just be very clear for everyone who's watching and listening. Do not take legal advice from the internet. If you think you need a lawyer, you probably do. It's not me or Gian. We're not representing you. But if you think you need a lawyer, you probably do. And I encourage everyone to go find outside counsel, especially the Transportation Lawyers Association, great organization to learn about what's happening in our business. So that disclaimer being said, and we'll have that disclaimer throughout, what is ROC? What is going on, Ryan? Can you explain to me what it is you guys have put together over the last couple of weeks?
Well, I will set the stage and then I'll turn the microphone over to Gian because he has much more experience in these matters than I do. But, I think we all looked back on May 14th when the Supreme Court made their decision. And a lot of us were pouring through the comments of like, what was actually said there? Because this seems to have changed the way this industry has operated for years. And, I thought Justice Kavanaugh's comments were particularly insightful because there were two elements that really stood out to me. I mean, leapt off the page that I felt that others were commentating on it or trying to react to the decision were missing. Number one, Justice Kavanaugh said that, like, look, you just have to ask the carriers the hard questions. And he said basically like brokers that do so shouldn't be facing this issue. So that was number one, asking the hard questions. And then number two was ensuring that carriers had a reasonable policy in place. Now, obviously that part is up for debate. What is reasonable? What is safe enough? And I get like, that's exactly, if it was clear, we wouldn't be on this, having this conversation today. But I think one thing is clear is that too many brokers, frankly, were not asking, quote unquote, the hard questions. That if there was an incident and they were hauled before a court and had to testify and they were asked the question, well, did you ask if this carrier fill in the blank? Do they do routine drug testing? Do they have a maintenance program? Do they do things that are actually required by law to be a motor carrier? Did you ask them if they do that? 9 out of 10 freight brokerages would have to answer honestly, no. We never asked. We just either assumed, we didn't want to know, all the above. And I think Justice Kavanaugh was making it pretty clear that like, hey, this is a new era in freight brokerage and you have to ask the hard questions and you need to ensure that carriers have a reasonable policy in place. And this led us to start to ideate on what would that look like? What would it look like to have an industry standard that for any tech company, that you have SOC 1 and SOC 2 compliance. Like you kind of need to self-testify that you have certain controls in place to keep customer data safe, financial controls, all the above. That's SOC 1. SOC 2 is then when an independent auditor comes in and actually says, well, let's ensure that you said you do this policy. Do you follow it? And we were like, what would it look like to have a similar SOC 1 and SOC 2, which has become very common in technical parlance? How would that look like in this industry? And that led us down a road to look at reasonable and ordinary care ROC. So with that, I'm going to pass the ROC back to you, Matthew, and over to Gian, because I really think you mentioned earlier, Matthew, like, hey, this is not legal advice. Please consult a lawyer. And actually, that is the request coming out of today. We would love to consult with your legal, either in-house or outside counsel to talk deeper about what reasonable and ordinary care standard is, how it was developed, and how it is designed to protect freight brokerages and frankly allow great carriers to be seen more, to get more better paying loads, because they're the ones that have a reduced risk of a nuclear verdict outcome when they've been asked and answered the hard questions, and they do prove that they have reasonable policies in place. So I'm going to shut up at this point, and I'm going to get out of the way for the real legal experts on this call is to start getting into the weeds here. And that's really the audience we want to reach today. Legal teams working with freight brokerages and the leadership teams that are trying to say, we just saw this $600 million verdict come out on C.H. Robinson. How do we avoid that in the future? And we think we have a pretty reasonable way to avoid that in the future. I
think that's a great way to transition. And Gian, I'm going to come to you on this question. So when we think about what a broker's job is to do, so the broker is working with the shipper, getting the freight, get the numbers, then they have to go source capacity. And the way they source capacity generally is they go to the FMCSA, they can see what some information about them. Maybe they have carrier vetting tools, but that is just not enough. We have now seen that if you just do the bare minimum, that's when you have the potential for exposure. So what is Rock trying to establish here, and how do you see this thing kind of going forward? For you, Gian. For you. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I'm so sorry. Yes.
Excellent.
This is the
Excellent.
world of live commentary.
Yes, indeed. I mean, you're teeing up the right questions that we're trying to hit here. The idea is, hey, Justice Kavanaugh was very clear that if brokers ask those hard questions, they can protect themselves better from the suits that are certainly coming. So what Genlock has tried to do with Rock is go through and survey, what do the regs actually say is reasonable? What should a good carrier be able to represent that they actually do? And rather than having the carrier go through and try to ask those individual questions in all sorts of different formats, and carriers having to respond to 40 different types of questionnaires, we've sought to try to centralize those questions across the core key items and criteria, as we call them. There are 12. That a carrier can say and self-attest that they are actually on top of these items, so that there's a record of that a broker can then go to and say, hey, we've asked the carrier these questions, and we have a reason to believe that we've discharged our reasonable duty of care to ask those questions. And the carrier can also represent that they are a reputable carrier along the lines of what Justice Kavanaugh says brokers should be looking to hire.
This is what's so interesting, because I think you hit the nail on the head, is ultimately they need to have replicable processes that are done the same way every single time. And it's an iterative process. Like, you can't just do one thing today and it's done forever. So what you guys have built with Rock One is that motor carriers can do a self-attestation. They're coming in and saying, we have satisfied these things. What got you to start with that pathway? Because Ryan's not a lawyer, so he doesn't he appreciates this, but I love getting in the weeds. Why was self-attestation the path for this, as opposed to, well, they already did that at the FMCSA, isn't that enough? Or what was the thinking behind that?
Well, I think there's no place for a carrier to go and actually integrate their answers into a broker's compliance file, for example. So we're trying to give brokers, say you're a small broker, you don't have a full-time compliance department, you have just a couple of power units. You don't have the sort of capability or the office and the manpower, if you will, to build out this very structured file. So what we're trying to do is give a simple way for brokers to answer the questionnaire so that they can, represent their answers back to the brokers that they're trying to get business from.
So this form, so if I'm a motor carrier, I'm like, I want to get access to more profitable work because I'm a very safe motor carrier. Where do we go? Is there, I think we had a link. We'll probably put that up after we get this thing recorded, but do motor carriers reach out to Genlogs and then complete this documentation?
Right. There are a few ways that they can come in, but we do have genlogs.io/rock, which is going live right about now. And there's a place there that a broker can come in and begin to do their self-attestation. And it'll take them through a pretty straightforward questionnaire. Can you represent that you are who you say you are? What is your FMCSA? Can you actually say that you have operating authority and that your rating is not one that is conditional or unsatisfactory? You actually are satisfactory and are unconditional. So you can make those attestations, and that then creates a record if you go through and actually answer the questions in the right way. You can then say that you are Rock One conformant, which a broker can then look at that standard. If they see that you're claiming to be Rock One conformant, they'll know that you've hit these particular items, which after we've looked at the FMCSA, the regulations that are out there in case law over time, these are kind of the questions that come up most often, both with respect to perhaps negligence per se, because you're not in compliance with particular regulations that you're required to be in, or there are questions that if you have to go to a jury and say, was it reasonable that you didn't ask this particular carrier, did they have a vehicle maintenance program? Was it reasonable that the carrier, can you say that you actually drug test the people, your drivers, in the way that you're supposed to in accordance with the regs? This Rock One questionnaire allows a carrier to answer all those questions once and for all, and then allows a broker to go back to that site and see that the carrier has answered it.
That's interesting, because one of the challenges we've seen is that when the broker comes in and takes too much control, and I think to your point earlier, Ryan, about that case down in Texas, everything's bigger in Texas, it appears, especially verdicts. But when you have the control of the broker over the motor carrier, that opens up the door for this vicarious liability, or as John might appreciate, respondeat superior. We get a little bit of Latin in there. But when it's a third party, it's a little bit better. I think there's an arm's length transaction. There's a little bit of room between the entities, and that's probably a useful thing. You did mention, Gian, like what we're seeing is we're trying to figure out what is reasonable care, not just like for one state, but this is all states. Every state's going to be different. Every safety exception is going to have different case law. So what we're looking at over the next couple of months, maybe years, is pressure testing a variety of solutions. So with ROC 1, like where do you see this thing going? Like after a motor carrier comes in, if there's a difference between what they said on the federal system at the FMCSA and what you have collected, what do you do with the delta? How are exceptions managed?
Absolutely. And Ryan, I think you may want to say a little bit about where we're going on that front. But the idea is that, look, we're launching this as a beta. We're bringing folks into it. And we hope, Genlogs is able to see trucks as they move around and help carriers better validate and verify that what it is that they're claiming they're doing is actually what they're doing on the road. And I think in future iterations, as we're opening the standard up and looking for more industry feedback on how this works, I think Genlogs is in a position to perhaps help folks, carriers and brokers, verify that what carriers are actually self-attesting to is what they're doing on the roads.
Yeah, and I'll chime in to say very similar to SOC 1 and SOC 2 compliance. SOC 1 is simply saying we have a reasonable policy in place. And SOC 2 is really the checks and balances. Like, hey, you say you do, but do you actually follow these standards as they are written? And similarly, like you can say a lot as a carrier, but then the record will reflect that, what's happening on the roads, what's happening with regards to safety, what we are observing across our network, what the FMCSA has with regards to inspections. So there's a checks and balances. Like obviously, if there's a self-attestation that just completely is not reflected in any of the existing data out there, that can and will be flagged in the future. And really no broker should be going anywhere near those carriers. But the flip side is freight needs to move. And that's what I think we all agree on, is that this entire country will come to a halt if freight stops to move because no one can tolerate the risk. And I heard Aaron Graff say this recently, the CEO over at Triumph, that, hey, either through litigation or legislation, we're going to figure this out. Like it's going to get figured out. But the bottom line is we all know freight needs to move. And the way that freight can move is when you have a good carrier who does have reasonable policy in place, who are asked the hard questions, self-attest that, and then the evidence correctly reflects that they do, that there aren't anomalous activity, that there isn't dangerous patterns emerging, that there aren't hours of service records or other issues that fleet up to the top to say, there's a discrepancy here. In an ideal world, there are two check marks. There's the ROC 1 self-attestation, and then there's the ROC 2, like, hey, does the record reflect that as well? It does. And at that point, it's really hard for a plaintiff's attorney to get in there and where there's no daylight between you ask the hard questions. That's what the Supreme Court asked. You examined, did they have reasonable policy? Yes, they did. And the record reflected that they did. That is freight that should be able to move. And hopefully everyone can get on board with that.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more. I mean, my father would always tell me freight doesn't stop. No matter what happens, what is going on, it doesn't matter because everything has to keep moving. What I think is really interesting is you go back 20 years, your technologies weren't available. I mean, there's just nothing like that. And so the state of the art changes. And as the state of the art changes, what you are required to do, whether you know it or not, is to validate and try out newer technologies to make sure you're compliant with what the state of the art is. And so as you guys have gone to market with Genlogs, it's really like the cameras all across this country, you couldn't manage anything unless you measured it. So you've measured an enormous amount of information. And this natural progression of now we know a lot about motor carriers. We want the motor carriers to participate. If I'm a motor carrier, I know I'm in your system already. What do I have to do? I have to pay to get this attestation, or is this something totally different?
Totally different. This is a free standard that we're issuing, frankly, to the entire industry, that if others want to adopt it, we have published our standards at genlogs.io/ROC, ROC. You can see it there right now. Carriers are able to go through our ROC attestation at genlogs.io/carriers right now. And there are a number that have. One thing that I do want to really dig into a little bit is that at the end of the day, like we all agree that freight does need to move. And Genlogs is also at the same time, Matt, you were talking about when new technologies come into place, that raises that standard of care, and now you need to adapt to it. Well, what's been fascinating is that in recent months, Genlogs has leveraged some really exciting data science on the back end of all of the data that we sit on. And we've now been able to predict which carriers are nearly 3 times as likely to get in a preventable crash within the next 90 days. And we've back tested that on FMCSA data, and the correlation holds true, which on the one hand is exciting because it's like, great, we actually can figure out who these bad actors are. And hint, hint, they're almost all chameleon carriers that are just popping up. You know, they go from 0 to 50 power units overnight. They're out there for a month, wreaking havoc and anarchy. And then they go under, and then all of a sudden a new carrier pops up. Well, we've actually seen who they are. We can predict those crashes out in advance. We've looked at what brokers, like different brokers that are using different carriers out there. And in some cases, 40% of a broker's carrier stable will be within that high risk, nearly 3 times as likely to get into a crash within the next 90 days. That is not a place that you want to be in, especially in this post-Montgomery era. And so we want to work directly with brokers to leverage this data that we have on to make better carrier selections, while working directly with carriers to say, hey, we see in the data that you are a lower risk based on what we're observing out there on the roads. If you self-attest to this, and then we prove it as well through the data evidence from FMCSA and Genlogs, then you're in a really good spot to get much more freight from brokers who may be willing to pay that extra penny on the backhaul to avoid $600 million outcome in the long run. And I think that's the risk reward calculus that's now going on, is if you go bottom dollar, I can assure you who you'll be getting. That is chameleon carriers that will carry your freight for dirt cheap. And they will absolutely get into more accidents over time. And the risk that ultimately comes to you will be higher. So I get it right now. Like a lot of 3PLs and freight brokerages are still grasping at what standards should they adopt, or what policy should they put into place to protect them in this era when the dust has not fully settled yet. But you know what is really clear is that plaintiffs' attorneys are licking their chops, and they are ready to come at it. I mean, why wouldn't you, now that this decision has come? So we're going to see more nuclear lawsuits drop, and we're going to see, unfortunately, I believe, more verdicts such as the $600 million decision and others that are kind of going to be these eye-watering amounts. And it'll almost be like the beatings will continue until the
morale improves.
Morale improves. Like there's going to have to be some changes made inside of a brokerage. You cannot live today like you lived 2-3 months ago. And Genlogs is simply saying, hey, we see the most data out of any organization on the planet when it comes to trucking. We actually hold the keys to who's safe and who's not. From a general perspective of being able to back test, we are here to help.
There's a couple of things I'm gonna pull the thread on. I hope Gian appreciates this, because I remember very vividly in law school with an evidence course, and this course was about unlawful searches and seizures, and they were using heat detecting cameras to say, oh, this house, they're growing marijuana, they're growing narcotics, we can go in because we have this thing that could scan the temperature. And it was Scalia's opinion saying, essentially, no, you can't do that. That's not common technology. But the moment that technology becomes ubiquitous, that is no longer an illegal search. And this is the thing I talk with a lot of brokers about who want to spend time talking about law and policy, is that when the technology changes and something that was not knowable now becomes knowable, and you chose not to want to know it, that is a problem. That is the fundamental problem with all of this stuff with Montgomery. The reality is that if something is knowable and you chose not to know it, that is going to cause you to have a lot of heartburn. And as we go forward the next months and again, years ahead, no one really knows yet what is a reasonable vetting process. We have a general consensus and a lot of other things out there, but it's about how you administer that policy and how you enforce that policy. And so one of the things I really am interested about this ROC, as you look at this, Gian, is if I'm going to be a broker, I'm going to be relying on Genlogs to collect this information, what is the kind of the assurances I have that the folks at Genlogs are reviewing this attestation? Is it quarterly? Is it yearly? Like, will carriers come back and do it again and say, I've done this again? Or do you see this as a one-time thing, and then you'll use your massive network of technology to verify and say, hey, we think you're out of compliance on something? How do you see this kind of developing?
Well, I say with respect to ROC 1 and our beta in particular, we have as a requirement that carriers not put themselves out as ROC 1 if it is the case that they fall beneath those standards. So that's in the first instance. You shouldn't have an active representation or active self-attestation if the carrier itself knows that it has fallen beneath the standards that it attested to previously. I'll also add, you reference evidence and evidentiary classes, and that's so much of what I think is ahead for brokers in the liability and the suits that are to come. They need to be able to say at a given moment of time, this is the information that was available to me about this particular carrier, and have a documented way to be able to produce that artifact, perhaps in litigation, to say, hey, I actually did ask the questions. These were the answers, and this is what I knew at the time. And Genlog is also working on a product called Snapshot that allows us to integrate what the carrier's ROC 1 answers were at that given time to say, this is what the broker actually looked at when booking this particular load. So we're looking to try to answer this both for carriers and for brokers on both ends, getting ahead of the lawsuits that are to come.
This is what gets me so excited, because I don't think the broader transportation industry understands yet what this real fallout's going to be. Because again, we're looking at brokers now and what they're doing to verify a motor carrier. But we do know the plaintiff's bar has their eyes set on the manufacturer. They're set on the shipper. They're set on everything else. And if you're able to use your technologies and say, this is what we knew at the moment, like that's more than, as you mentioned a second ago, Ryan, more than any other data company in transportation and logistics. You know more about every motor carrier in the country than anyone else does. Even more, and they know this, I know they know this, more than the government. You know more than the government about the motor carriers. And so this kind of change always seems like it takes forever. It's gradual, then very, very fast. What do you hope to see when it comes to ROC 1 adoption in the next 6 months to 12 months? How long does this beta go on for? And what can motor carriers who decide to participate, what might they expect when it's all said and done?
I think we're putting it out in the market to make sure that the assumptions that we've made about what this will actually mean for brokers, and even the experience of frankly coming in to interact with our platform, we want to make it as easy as possible for brokers to process through and fill this questionnaire out, take that knowledge, and then provide it to the brokers that they're trying to get business from. So we're working to iterate on that. But with respect to the actual core standards, look, cases are being filed all over the country all the time. We want to make sure that our standard is both current, relevant, and flexible, so that if there is some criteria that is not part of it at present, we can integrate that into future iterations. And our program site will show sort of a change log and how it is that we deal with particular comments that we receive from folks about how to make this the industry standard. At some point, perhaps the federal government will step in and provide a more robust explanation of what the standard is. I think there are folks, TIA, for example, has gone and asked the FMCSA to engage in some rulemaking around this. They asked for kind of 3 core elements of that the carrier is registered, that the carrier has insurance, and that the carrier has not been deemed unfit. Our policy integrates those 3 elements as well, but builds on it to cover other areas of the regulations that are not part of that go above and beyond, but not even above and beyond, are effectively the floor and baseline of what any carrier should be able to say they do.
Do you anticipate like motor carriers coming and looking for guidance? Like, okay, what else can I do to be more attractive to a broker? How do you see that playing out?
Absolutely. If a carrier isn't able to attest to these items, I think they should definitely be aspirational and things that they should be thinking about anyway, because again, it represents sort of the baseline of what most carriers should be able to do and say that they do if they're going to be compliant with the regs as they apply to them. So yes, I do think that carriers, if they're not able to make those representations, we're thinking about ways that Genlog's trying to be a good partner to carriers all over the place, regardless of their size, might be able to help those types of carriers perhaps develop a drug and alcohol testing policy if they don't have one at present. So yes, that's certainly something we're talking about. And if there is a demand signal for that, I think from the market, it's something that Genlogs would, I'm getting ahead of my CEO over there, but something I'm sure that we'd be open to thinking about how we can better support keeping America's roads safe.
Well, and I've talked about this before that, my heart and the heart of Genlogs is with the mom and pop carrier out there that is frankly struggling to get loads because 4 different types of carriers are taking it from them. The cabotage guys, the careless carriers out there, the chameleon carriers, and the cargo theft guys. I mean, like there's just like bad actors that are trying to undercut good actors out there, and our heart is with the good guys. So we are this month, not only in addition to Rock, but we're quietly releasing a beta of our own carrier platform when it comes to helping carriers not like get seen by brokers, being able to understand where they operate, being able to attest that like, hey, I am actually the real owner of those assets that are out there on the roads. And then combined with that is having the Rock badge right there for every broker to see. That like, hey, they've actually attested to the fact that they have these reasonable and ordinary carrier compliance policies in place. I will say during some of the early testing of Rock, some carriers did not get through the process because they got held up on some questions where they answered no, where you needed to answer yes to successfully navigate it. And it was an opportunity for us to say like, hey, that's actually a requirement by law. And if you're answering no to this, you need to get this done. Like, and we're helping you understand like how to stay compliant as a carrier. And then as carriers stay compliant, we're able to broadcast that to brokers being like, hey, if you want to reduce the risk of a nuclear verdict, use these carriers on this lane. We, by the way, Genlogs can predict that they're less likely to get into an accident. They've already said that they've answered these hard questions and that they have reasonable and ordinary care policies in place. Like that is a great recipe for a great outcome. You're reducing the risk that there will be an accident. And if there is, you're having that evidence as to FMCSA said they were low risk. Genlog said they were low risk. The carrier answered these questions. They said they had these in place. Like, what more do you want, plaintiff's attorney, when it's all laid out there and categorized and cataloged? And so that's really what you asked, Matthew, what an ideal outcome looks like here. It's people layering in the different capabilities that are out there in the market. And it's being able to tell a story as to how they actually take safety seriously and what they have done to vet these carriers.
But it's fascinating because like one of the things in the documentation was like the vehicle maintenance program. And I think so many people get confused on vehicle maintenance because it's all just breakdowns. Like, oh, we're just going to let the truck, we'll do an oil change once a year and it'll break down, we'll fix it and it'll go back up. That's a maintenance program. What I find so interesting about what Genlogs is capable of doing, at least on the maintenance side, is when there is a breakdown, you guys can probably help tell where the accident, where the truck is, where it needs to go, what providers are close by. And so, excuse me, getting more value for the motor carriers. This is what makes it so interesting. So as Rock gets out there, how long does this beta go on for, Ryan? Is it something real quick, or is it something that's going to be going on as an iterative process?
It'll certainly be iterative, as is every product at Genlogs, by the way. Like we've never launched a static product and we never will. We will continue to improve and iterate on it. Right now, we're working with a handful of brokerages and a few hundred carriers to make sure like, hey, can they get through this? Does it make sense to them? Are there questions that they have? This has been quietly going on now for about 2 months since that, like literally the week after the decision was reached. Internally at Genlogs, we were like, we are going to act on behalf of our customers. And we're going to do that right away. And so we've been testing this a little bit more. That'll simply expand over time. With over 125 customers now at Genlogs, we will be rolling this out from, a few to a dozen to dozens and beyond. But this is really what it comes down to is, and I'm just going to be speaking really frankly here. It is really difficult if your buyer at a brokerage is the head of capacity to walk in and basically say, hey, here's a tool or a system that could actually cut down on the capacity that you have, or at least that's how they view it. If like, oh my gosh, if I send this out to all my carriers and they all answer this, and a few of them can't answer it honestly, or they fail it, then I'm now limiting my capacity. My job is to have enough capacity. This doesn't sound like a good trade-off. Now, if you go a step above to the COO, the CEO, or the chief legal officer, they understand that like, hey, we don't mind having a little bit less capacity to have much less risk. And so there's a little bit of like ensuring that we are communicating this well abroad. But let me put a point for any carrier sales reps or capacity officers that are listening. You have the capacity you have today. And I assure you, Genlog sees about 10x more of it on the roads. And so when you actually look, and this is the coolest thing we've done, is when we rate all of the carriers by their risk, their potential to be in a crash, a preventable crash within the next 90 days. Over half the carriers on the roads are less than 10% risk, as in the lowest bucket of risk possible. So over half. So if there's 350,000 carriers, for-hire carriers on the roads, thereabouts, we have about 175,000 carriers that we could put in your hands that we have looked at and said, there isn't a high degree of risk that we're seeing. And those carriers are the likely ones that are going to be able to answer yes on Rock. I doubt there are many people here listening that use on a regular basis over 175,000 carriers. So we really have unlimited capacity, more than you can handle. And we can find the ones that are actually compliant and lower risk. That's what every freight broker should be tapping into right now, is low risk, compliant carriers that carry a lower risk of crashes and nuclear verdicts, but can still move 10x as much freight as you're moving today. That's how Genlogs can help you get there.
When Genlogs brings on a new customer, because you've mentioned 125 customers now.
Yeah, it's happening so quickly. We could be another 15 to 20 above that, but it's a healthy number that keeps growing.
When you bring on a new brokerage customer, are you going and auditing the existing capacity they have and saying, hey, this is ones we would say you need to get rid of? Or are you more like hey, we're the extra, you can use us when you need to?
Most of the times we're doing that even before the sale, during that buying process. We're saying, hey, upload, your spreadsheet here of your carriers. We're going to give you your distribution of risk right now. And we're going to show you what it looks like through the FMCSA's eyes with regards to inspection selection scores and basic scores. But then we're going to show you where Genlog sees risk that FMCSA is missing. And they'll tell you they can only see what they measure or only measure what they see, I should say. And they're not seeing. We see 32,000 carriers on a rolling basis that have never had an inspection. If you've never had an inspection, you have no ISS score, which means the government has no basis by which to make determinations of whether you are, safe, conditionally safe. There is just no rating there. And that's where most of these carriers, as you know, fall into this no rating bucket. No rating is not a defense in the courts anymore.
That's right. And not even having satisfactory is a good defense in some cases.
Not even satisfactory, as we just learned the other week.
So this is a question for you, John, because I'm really excited to kind of get a perspective of a lawyer who's new to this space of transportation logistics. So you were in, I imagine, one of the most dangerous places in the world, doing incredible things within government and private practice. You come to this, I'm not going to call our industry a dumpster fire, Ryan. That's not fair. That's not a fair characterization. But there are hundreds of thousands of motor carriers, about 4,000 to 6,000 new motor carriers every single month. The FMCSA, our regulator for that part of the business, they hope to touch every motor carrier within 12 or 18 months. They don't often do that, so you can't even get ratings. So to Ryan's earlier point, it's 95,000 or 95% of all motor carriers have no rating whatsoever. How crazy is this industry? As you looked at it, now you've been here from is this bizarre, or is this not as weird as we all think that it is?
It's a little wild, and it's why we need some more structure and some more solutions like what we're putting out right now. Earlier in my career, just even in private practice, I worked in that time when cybersecurity risk and data protection risk was something that people began to think about as sort of a corporate governance issue, right? How do we manage this risk? What are the systems that we put in place? I look at this industry and think that we can take lessons learned from what we're talking about with SOC and other places to bring it in, to apply frameworks that allow people to just deal with the law and the frameworks that have been around for a long time. Are you thinking about risk reasonably? Are you discharging your duty of care and not being negligent? And I think Genlogs has the capability to see a lot to help folks prove that out along the way. But yeah, lots of conversation to be had to see what else in other frameworks and lessons learned we can apply.
Now, we've talked a lot about the brokers, which obviously have the legal risk that they're trying to navigate with Montgomery. We talk about the motor carriers who want to be known and discovered. How do insurers play into this space? What have you heard from the insurers who ultimately are the ones on the hook for at least what the premium is paying for, what the coverage limitations are? How are the insurers reacting to what you guys are putting together?
Yeah, I will say the element that really blew me away was when we started to develop Rock, we were doing so really with the broker in mind. Hey, this opinion just came down. We need to help our broker customers. We need to give them some tools that would allow them to truly stand there in a court of law and say, nope, we did ask the hard questions. This carrier did have reasonable policies in place. And it was actually a lot of the insurance companies that were saying, hey, we actually need this too, because we want to make sure they have a maintenance policy. Because if they don't, then all of a sudden now we have a greater risk of us going to be paying out as a potential, a wheel flies off as they're going down the highway.
Absolutely.
And so there's a clear demand signal all around to really identify who are the good carriers, but also how can we help them? Matthew, I'm going to drop a name for you that I know you love him dearly. I was with Alex Frazier yesterday.
Yeah.
Fox Automotive, one of my favorite people in the industry, and I have you to thank for introducing me.
I do the best I can, my friend.
You're incredible, but I know his heart is with carriers, man, and he wants to make sure that they get ahead of any would-be breakdown or disaster, making sure that their assets are continuing to be out there. We feel the same way when it comes to compliance. Hey, let's get ahead of there being an issue, carrier, and if we can get ahead of it for you, then all of a sudden we just made all of our products more valuable for freight brokers and insurance companies and the government that's having to deal with less investigations and mess. So it really starts with the carrier. And that's why there are some others out there that seem to, if not in name, then in ways that they're dealt with, treat carriers as second-class citizens, or really maybe have almost an anti-carrier, you're guilty until proven innocent. And what we want to do is let's just really allow the innocent guys and the good guys to self-identify up front. And then now we shrink this pool that we really have to scrutinize to say, why aren't you getting on board with the fact that, can you not attest that you don't have a reasonable policy in place? That's really where the risk starts to happen. So that for every carrier that goes through the process, the pool of risk shrinks, in terms of who's still out there. And that's really what we want to do, is really cast the spotlight on the ones that need it. 90-something% of this industry are carriers that are really striving to do their best and want to carry freight with no accident.
Yeah, I'll add to that, just not in the sense that, carriers who are hearing this, they can go to the website, genlogs.io/rock ROC, and they can begin the process themselves. But it's also the case that brokers can invite their entire carrier suite, everyone that they're working with, to come through and use the program, and they integrate it into part of what their compliance program is. It's the same thing for insurers, quite honestly. An insurer, if you're underwriting a great deal of transportation freight, you can have those carriers that you're underwriting go through the ROC process, and it can serve as an artifact that you build into your program to help lower your risk, because you'll know, as Ryan just said, those folks who have been able to go through and answer all these questions are at a much lower risk, which brings down your underwriting profile a great deal.
If I was an insurer, I'd say, fill out this form. I'd go back to you and say, what can you show me about this motor carrier? Because I want to know as much as I possibly can. And so it just seems a natural progression of the workflow. And I think, Gian, you and I can agree on this, I suspect. For the plaintiff attorneys and the defense attorneys out there, none of us want these crashes. Nobody wants these crashes. No one wants to have someone who can't go home that day. And when we look at trucking generally, it is the 8th most dangerous job in the United States. So it's not just you have an accident, you have a toe and rotator cuff when you're pulling up the swing door, whatever can happen. And so what we're trying to do ultimately is get people home in the same condition they left. I think, Ryan, your point with Alex Frazier, they do breakdown stuff. They don't want to do breakdowns. We want you to just go to where you're supposed to go. But if the worst thing happens, we're gonna be there to help support you and get you back on the road. But that's, I think, this lost piece is that this idea that we all are adversaries combating each other, trying to destroy this pile of sand. And reality is we just want to go home. We just want to go home and be able to hug our kids. And this industry is just broken in some ways. The national out of service rate, 22% for commercial vehicles. So we know there's these big gaps. But when you try to make it better, putting things like ROC 1 in place to say, okay, we're going to start trying to change how the industry works. The industry is going to say, don't do it. Don't bother. Why do you want to bother? So how do you keep motivated as people keep saying, don't worry about it. Everything's fine. How do you feel yourself getting into the weeds in the transportation business?
I think the proof is ultimately. Oh, go ahead, Ryan.
Well, no, I was just going to answer to say, at the end of the day, Genlogs would not be worth doing it unless we stood for something. And, when the Supreme Court decision came out, Genlogs was already working on some of this underlying risk data. And what came to light when we could now predict out which carriers are 3 times as likely to get in a preventable crash in the next 90 days, Like, as you know, the statistics are over 5,000 Americans die every year involved in truck crashes. And Genlogs decided as a company, we are committed to dropping that number by 1,000 per year. We are going to save 1,000 lives. And we're going to do that in two ways. We're going to extend a hand to the government to work with them to get better understanding of like how to put in regulations and how to monitor what's actually happening on the roads and investigate crashes to see who these chameleon carriers are that keep popping up. And in one case, we saw a chameleon network over the course of about 7 or 8 carriers that they kept rotating into. They had caused over 200 crashes and 16 deaths. And we just saw them over and over, same assets switching and over. And it's like, we see it. We could flag day one, we could stop it. So on the one hand, we want to work with the government to stop that from a regulatory perspective across the board. That helps the entire industry. But then customer by customer, putting that into practices that allows them to avoid those bad actors and put their hand and freight in the hands of good actors. Over time, when freight starts to shrivel up from those bad actors, they'll find another industry to go pester. And that's what we are committed that way, is kind of like a pincer movement. We are going to save 1,000 lives per year. And that's like what the team at Genlogs rally around when we're building this technology. Sure, like in the long run, Genlogs is going to be fine from a financial perspective, but it is much more rewarding when you go to your head hits the pillow at night and you know that you're directly responsible for saving 1,000 lives a year.
What's so fascinating to me is like when you first started this company, Ryan, and we talked years ago about some of these things, is that oftentimes when it comes to like what a motor carrier is dealing with every day, and they're in the weeds, they're talking to brokers, they don't have a way to really market themselves. They're really just kind of if they're a small motor carrier, broker's the only thing you can work with. And the brokers have looked at the motor carriers in some cases as antagonistic, but neither of those survive without the other. Like they don't exist without the other. Like Old Dominion doesn't need a bunch of small owner ops. That's not what they use. So as you kind of see this pathway moving forward, this animosity between brokers and carriers starts kind of getting shrunken down further and further. And if you have the right tools in place, you can help motor carriers punch above their weight class if they can safely deliver freight, and you can tell with your data that they're doing it every day. So there's this interesting kind of egalitarian nature of what Genlogs is bringing to both the motor carriers who don't know they're being monitored, but they are being monitored, and then the brokers who now by law must do more. They have to do more. Whatever they're doing currently, even if it's fine, they need to get someone to evaluate it externally and say, okay, this is what you need to be looking at in the future. So this is an interesting time in the business, I have to imagine.
Yeah, completely fascinating time. Like we feel like we're really at a tipping point for a few reasons. I mean, you got to keep in mind, we started Genlogs in 2023, basically at the trough of the great freight recession. Like, not the time that you want to be. There was only headwinds at that point in time and no tailwinds. And we had to build this like brick by brick. And now we're at a place where, hey, capacity, thanks to a lot of the enforcement that's going on, is getting tight. Rates are going up. There's a lot of other things happening when it comes to fuel rates and all of that aren't great. But, capacity is getting tight. And now compliant capacity is getting even tighter. And so now is the time that everything Genlogs has built for the last 3 years is truly now being offered up to say, if you do not want a $600 million nuclear verdict, and you want to find as much capacity as possible and as much customers as possible, then you invest one time in Genlogs and you get both outcomes there. More and better, you grow your business, you find more capacity, you move more freight, and you do so at a reduced risk. How is that not a great outcome?
Is the subscription to Genlogs under $600 million? Is that fair characterization? Is that right?
We'll discount a little bit more just to make sure that we can get you right in the door. Yeah, I mean, it is it is like the best insurance policy that you could ever have that actually pays you. And we had a customer that just renewed excitedly for their second year there. And what they have found is that the carriers that they are sourcing via Genlogs are not only safer, but they're actually like hauling for better rates because they're finding carriers that are like right on the lanes that those carriers want to return on. And they're not twisting that carrier's arms. They're just saying, hey, I didn't know you existed, but I have freight for you and you're compliant. Would you like it? And those dead haul miles are turning into dollars for both the carrier and the broker. It's a great outcome.
That's phenomenal. Now, as we get ready to wrap up, Brian and Gian, like, where am I going to see you guys next? We're just at the beginning of conference season, which apparently goes for like it's months and months and months. There's so many. Is the GenLogs team heading to next, Ryan?
Well, I'll be at Jock Inland next month in Chicago.
Yeah, JOC.
So hopefully see you at JOC there. We'll have folks at TIA Technovations. We'll have them at F3 in Chattanooga. And, I should also say GenLogs will be hosting our first ever user conference this November in an undisclosed city where we will have armed security, because we are going to be rolling out some of the most advanced technology to cut down on cabotage, chameleon carriers, cargo thieves, and careless carriers. And we can't let that methodology get out too widely. So if you're in the room, you are part of the special few. That is happening in end of November. And Matthew, I will see you there.
I am excited. I've also heard rumors, maybe you can confirm this, that you might be at IANA, the Intermodal Association of North America. Is that happening? Is your team going to be there?
Team should be there. So you can find us too. Fortunately, we've grown the team to over 100 people so that we can almost be at all places at once. Because like you said, 7 straight months of conferences and seemingly 7 a day. It'll pull you tight. But look, the team over at IANA, world-class, and we love their conference. So we look forward to seeing folks there too.
Well, I will see you in person at JOC. I'll be doing a fireside chat with Jesse Elison, Deputy Administrator of the FMCSA. So I know you know him well, so it'll be a good time. All right, as we wrap up, I have one final question for both of you. It's completely unrelated to this industry. So I'll start with you, Gian, because you can answer it first, and I'll have Ryan. So here's what's happened, okay? I am a 41-year-old man. I have never been a head coach for anything. I am now the head coach for the middle school cross-country team, boys and girls, for River Valley Christian School. So we're cross-country for middle school. Any tips for the young runners, men and women, who are going to be hitting the trails relatively soon? What can you leave these wonderful students with?
Run hard and then walk it off.
I like that.
Matthew, I got to chime in to say, Gian and I did serve overseas together in some really hot areas. And while many of us would all be working out, he went out to work out with the retired athlete shirt on every day. And so the guy was world class, and he has a ton of wisdom to give you there, I'm sure.
That's fair. What sport did you do, Jen? Now I don't have to know. What was you?
All purpose, all athlete.
There you go, man. I was a sprinter. I was a 400-meter dash guy. That was a long time ago.
Oh, I like the 800 on the track, but that's pain too. As I say, pain is weakness leaving the body. That's at least what my coach used to tell me.
If I didn't throw up after the race, I was mad at myself because I knew I could have done better.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was going to say my suggestion, Matthew, would be to bring them to the trophy case at your high school and show them what a Hall of Fame athlete looks like. And then show them greatness. And then at that point, they're going to have to live up. So
this was a tough year. I mean, I had the 400-meter dash record at my high school for over 20 years. For 20 years, my record stood. And this year, it's gone. And that's what records are meant. They're meant to be broken. So good. God bless the people who are faster than me. I'm not getting any taller, and I'm certainly not getting any faster. So as we wrap up, I will make sure to put in the show notes links to this new standard. People have questions. Where can they go to learn more about this new standard that GenLogs is rolling out for everybody?
So genlogs.io/ROC for ROC, for reasonable and ordinary care. You can also email us at support@genlogs.io with any feedback on the standard. And if you have questions or want to get involved in the program, we're ready to respond to you right away to make sure you know where to go.
And where can plaintiff attorneys and defense attorneys file subpoenas as they look to get access to your records?
Well, I'm not going to give out my personal email address, but I'll say as a general matter, look, it's going to be an industry standard. If plaintiff attorneys have ways that they can suggest that brokers can better prepare to defend against the suits that they might bring, we're open to that kind of feedback as well. So send it to support@genlogs.io.
Yeah, and if I could, I'll close by making a really clear point on that matter. You know, we joke about it, but we have been asked by plenty of plaintiffs' attorneys, can we get access to your platform? Can we get access to the platform? And as a general matter, the answer is no. And in fact, like that is our policy is we are not selling our platform to either plaintiffs' attorneys or defense attorneys.
Sure.
And yet, Matthew, you're absolutely right. Like, we cannot stop a subpoena in the sense of like, and we don't want them, but like what a freight broker can't do is just say, great, Genlogs is not giving their data to plaintiffs' attorneys. We don't have to accept like the higher standard of vetting that it comes if you did have access to this and you could see some of this. It is really incumbent upon both Genlogs customers and non-customers to know that like the data is out there. I could tell you what are the chameleon carriers on the roads right now. And if they are hauling your freight and they get into an accident and we have to say, did you know? And the answer is yes. Like, we do know who the chameleon carriers are. It's not a good look. And so we want everyone to get the protection up front, because as much as we can hold at an arm length, say we don't sell it, we don't sell it, we don't sell it. That's not an outcome that we want, is for any customer to be caught unaware when they knowingly said, yeah, we could, know that the data is there, but we're going to choose not to know it. And then it becomes known. So like it's a fine line to walk, but to be really clear, we're not selling our platform to any defense or plaintiff's attorneys. We do, though, want to make sure that everyone in the industry is protected. And we'd love to chat with you about that at genlogs.io, upper right-hand corner, book a demo. We'll chat you through what we're doing on that.
I love that. I want to get your thoughts before I wrap up. One of the things that a lot of companies have struggled with over the years in this space and other technology spaces is they say, I don't want to be a system of record. I don't want to actually control anything. I want to just I want my toll. I want my little piece of it, but I don't want to own any part of the data. And the reality is like, that's a cowardly response. Like, if you're going to go out there and you're going to try and solve a problem, you need to be the one who owns that data. And one of the things that I encourage a lot of lawyers, I teach law students and I do CLEs for practitioners, is that you know where data can be found. If you know who might have something that would be relevant to your case, you will file a subpoena, and maybe someone quashes it, maybe they don't, but this data is available through the legal processes. And if you choose not to go down a path to see what is available, you guarantee your adversaries will. And the plaintiffs bar has now realized that this industry, the hundreds of billions of dollars of freight moved annually through intermediaries, is a place where they have some potential for massive wins. These lawyers take 1/3, they get a lot of this money. And so if you choose not to use the technology available to you, woe be to you, because ultimately someone will use it, and then your client will be disadvantaged because you don't have access to the same technologies and tools. So I'm always a doom and gloom kind of guy. I try and do it with a smile, but I appreciate you guys. Thank you for joining us today. We'll have a recording available all different places. We'll chop it up. But any final words before we wrap up for today, my friends?
Gian, over to you.
Own the roads.
Own the roads. That's the Genlog slogan. Matthew, thanks so much for having us on and letting us talk about this really important topic. We're excited to get this standard underway, see adoption start to grow, and start to, frankly, save 1,000 lives on the roads every year. That's what we're all about. We appreciate that.
Thank you for joining us. I think it's a great way to call out. I appreciate that. Ryan Joyce, Gian Favors, you guys are done. Get them out of here. That is the webinar. Here's the reality. We are facing a new crisis for the transportation community. That is, how do I know a motor carrier is safe? And how do I know my processes for identifying that motor carrier, hiring and retaining them is reasonable? The only way you're going to know that is through litigation. And if you're going to be down the path of litigation, whether it's state by state or federal circuits, you have to have the right tools. I am so proud of my partnership with the team at Genlogs. ROK1, check it out. We'll have the show notes where you can go and look at this right now. If you're a motor carrier, you better hop in there. You better figure out what you're doing. This freight isn't going to stop, but maybe the brokers are going to have to make some changes. We will see you again next time on this wonderful thing we continue to do. And back to school is here, so we'll catch you sooner than later. Take care. And that's the end of that.